Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm Christine Grimmett, and in this episode, we'll actually be playing an episode of another podcast called The Dr. Joe Show, where Heartbeat's good friend and often Pregnancy Help Podcast guest, Dr. Joe Malone, will speak on topics surrounding women's sexual health and wellness. And I'll add a link to the show notes where you can find episodes of The Dr. Joe Show on YouTube if you'd like to check those out. And we wanted to feature this episode because he's interviewing Heartbeat's housing specialist and director of the Maternity Housing Coalition, Valerie Harkins. This episode will help us better understand how trauma stemming from relationships impacts a woman's brain and makes it harder to break those cycles, and how the pregnancy help movement can reach her and help her create new neural pathways so that she's able to have healthy relationships moving forward. You may have heard us here at Heartbeat International using that term sexual wellness a lot more lately. You can even go back to an episode of the Pregnancy Help Podcast published in February with Dr. Joe Malone, where he explains that term a little bit further, but he has also helped us to publish a new curriculum on women's sexual wellness that I'll link to in the show notes as well. We're really excited to get that in people's hands, so I encourage you to take a look at that after you listen to this episode.
Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show, where we learn about women's health and sexual wellness. Today we have a great guest with us, Valerie Harkins, who is from Heartbeat International, and I'm going to let her tell you about herself, her work, and that type of thing. One thing I'd like to mention is that she's trying to recover from a back injury right now, so she may need to move around, and if so, I told her that's fine. We can talk and move at the same time. So anyway, Valerie, thank you for coming, and welcome, and tell us about yourself.
I appreciate that, Dr. Joe, and thanks for the liberty to move around. I appreciate it. As you said, my name is Valerie Harkins. So I am the director of the Maternity Housing Coalition that's housed under Heartbeat International. And so we exist to support maternity homes through collaboration, education, support, connection. And my background leading up to this point is one that started with maternity housing and really becoming exposed to the depth of work that happens in there. And for those that might be unfamiliar, maternity housing is a type of nonprofit. It's a broad term that essentially provides housing for women that are pregnant or parenting children and need support for that. Now, that's usually residential support, but also takes place with holistic wraparound services. And so in any of these homes, you might see also counseling support, maybe recovery, drug and alcohol recovery support, employment support, savings, financial education, parenting, childcare, all kinds of resources there. So my work started with exposure to maternity housing, and that led me organically into what became a specialization in trauma-informed care and attachment theory. And what I learned is that as circumstances and times have changed generationally in America, certainly America and nationally, what we found is that the needs and the profile of the residents in these homes has changed. And the trauma experienced by these residents has increased tremendously. And regarding attachment theory, what we find is that many of the residents were never provided an opportunity to form a secure attachment in infancy. That means they were never given an opportunity to form the basic building blocks of trust, the ability for their brain to trust anything in the world, just broadly speaking. Mm-hmm. That started with their caregiver. And so learning about the impact of trauma, how that impacts health, neurology, the child in utero when she becomes pregnant, decision-making skills, everything, that all plays a huge role. And I began to learn about that and how that impacts the way that we serve her in maternity homes. So I've had an opportunity of working with maternity homes in Houston, Texas, and then training maternity homes and consulting all over the nation. And now I get to work with the coalition, which is an international maternity housing coalition here at Heartbeat International, which is how I got connected connected with you. It was a very uh, organic interest that I had when I heard about what you do. And I will say, time when I get connected with you, I feel often overwhelmed with curiosity and questions about the work that you do and how that applies or impacts the women that are being served in maternity homes. So when you invited me on, it was a very eager yes to give.
Well, I'm very grateful to have you here. And you have a wonderful specialization, and I want me and our audience to learn as much as we can today about the things that are happening that you described there with these girls and young women. So, what would you say the average age of the young women that you're working with is now? Has that changed over the years, or it's still about the same?
It's definitely changed over the years. Once upon a time, there was kind of a story. I'd say 20 years ago, the idea was there was a teenager that became pregnant in high school, and her parents did not want to allow her to remain in the home. That's different. Now we see women that are mid 20s, just roundabout, or even early 30s, that have no familial support.
Mhm.
We see they're round about the fourth generation of um, orphanhood, of broken families, or a lack of parental support or any type of communal support
Mhm.
overall.
That's yeah, that has changed quite a bit then, upward in age. Um, so you said the fourth generation of being in this situation, kind of an orphaned situation, I think was the term you
Yeah.
used. Um, what kind of attitudes do they have? Are they easy to work with, or are they difficult to work with, or what do you see?
Wow, that's really that's all over the map. And let me tell you why. The reason why is because these women are brilliant in survivors, and each of them has had to come up with a strategy to survive in life. And they've continued to do whatever works. And what we know is whatever they're doing is working because they're alive, and they've even managed to find the resource they need. I mean, even managed to find their way to a maternity home.
Hmm.
And so the question for what it's like to work with them really is, it depends on what has worked for them in the past and what their strategy is. Some have found their way through charm, some have found their way through isolation, some through aggression, some through lying or manipulating. Whatever got the immediate need met at that time. She usually sharpened those skills. So I would say every resident, it's a different experience, and they continue to amaze me.
Yes, I can imagine that. And like as you said, very intelligent to be able to go through what they've gone through and get to the
Yeah.
point where they're at. What do you see as far as the solutions to the situation? Do you see? And I can go into some things that I've been doing research on that might chime in with this. But what do you see as far as going forward? Is this what you're doing? Is it meeting the need? And is there a situation where they're coming out on the other end, going in a better direction, or do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, so we see that quite a bit. There's actually some research being done right now to empirically measure the impact of maternity housing on the residents.
Hmm.
And what we know is that residents have an opportunity to go to maternity home. And the longer they stay at maternity homes, the better the outcomes. And what we mean by those outcomes is we mean stability. So the ability for their children to remain in their care, for them to live in a stable home that is violence free, and to have some sort of steady income coming in. That often does include some element of faith development as she is there. As she has her most immediate needs met, we find that for the first time she has the bandwidth to consider other subjects, such as relationships or health in a relationship, communication skills, and and the existence of God and what her relationship with God might be or might look like, right? And so what we find is that there's a transformation opportunity that the women have available to them in the maternity homes, surely number one, from the emergency of survival being alleviated, number one. And on top of that, we see that they're in these programs that are holistic programs looking to support the resident in as much as they can every facet of their development and in their lives. So we do see women creating new generational cycles and patterns, which they are thrilled about. What we find, though, is that this requires long-term support. This isn't a one-time fix. Just as many of us, we have long-term support. We don't only have parents for ages 1 through 5 or 1 through 18, and then they're gone. But most in a healthy family, they are on for their entire lives, right? They become grandparents to their children, and later adult children become somewhat friends with their parents. We see that there's a long-term relationship there. And what we're finding is that maternity homes are becoming there, although that might not always be, of course, living in the home. We find that those relationships are long-lasting. And this is really what we're finding is needed for lasting and permanent change. It really takes place in repairing the places of the first injury. And the first injuries were injury to relationship, to intimacy, and to trust that happens in infancy, and then later through childhood. Many of our residents have reported, nearly 100% of our residents report experiencing two things, which is domestic violence or interpersonal relationship violence and sexual assault. And on average, our residents report their first sexual encounter being about 4 years old. It's about 4 to 7 years old. Whoa. Right? And so whenever we think about the impact of what happened there, right? How did that affect her understanding of the world going forward, her relationships? And then we multiply that by thousands, an entire generation of women that have fallen through the cracks of society without a safety net there and without anyone that was there to notice their pain or available to intervene. We realize that this isn't going to be a quick fix, that we want to see lasting change. So we see maternity homes really stepping up with long-term resources, and sometimes I'll call them aftercare support, where it's events or a place of safety that former residents of a maternity home continue to come back, where they have a place that feels like home, and relationship with staff members that begin to feel like friends that are family over time. And the children grow up with consistent faces, right? And some sort of tradition or consistency there, where they might have otherwise got that through grandparents and aunts and uncles. Now maternity homes are creating communities where women can begin to build that and have support, even learning how to build that for their children for the first time.
Right. A thought that comes to mind along the lines of your description: what's the net result now after what they've been through of their attitude towards men? How do they see the possibilities of maybe as you said, a long-term relationship with a man? What would you say that what do you think the prognosis for them in relationships going forward is?
Well, there's two parts to that. The first is, initially men are seen in a variety of ways, again, depending on how they've survived. Mm-hmm. They may be seen as dangerous, and a threat, someone to be suspicious of and cautious around, someone to protect your heart and to not trust, mm-hmm. someone to expect disloyalty and pain from. Mm-hmm. And some see all of those things that are true about men, and may also see them as means provision, right? They might choose to endure domestic violence because they see a man as a means for a stable home, or a roof over their head and money in the bank. And some might see men as a customer, a client, right? They might see them as a means for resources. We have quite a few women. We're working on nailing down the numbers specifically but right now it's securely, we can say, more than a third. Um, it looks like it could be about half, but definitely more than a third of the residents have experience within the sex industry, whether that looks like direct sex work, pornography, a wide variety, whether, dancing, there's a lot there. And so some see men as, a part of the economy. And that's been their way of surviving, of smart. Now, what we find is they would have no reason to believe anything different about men. But whenever we get them in the home and we start talking to them, and that urgency of survival goes away, and they begin to think about these deeper things, many of them have a dream that feels like a fantasy, that their child is going to have a father and he's going to be kind and he's going to be faithful, and what feels far-fetched to them, like a Cosby type of setup, a Cosby type dream. But there's a dream for a family there. There's a dream for a safe man, a husband for them, and a father to their children. And what we find is, over time, some women, even, they want that dream so badly that they choose to go back into dangerous situations and dangerous relationships. And they will tell us, I mean, it is directly related to the chasing that hope of a family, particularly for their child. The idea is they've heard for so long the dangers of absent fathers and being raised by single mothers, that some are truly traumatized by the idea that their child that they love is going to grow up without a father. And so they then take that information and blend it and even put themselves in very risky situations, if only their understanding is their child will grow up with a father. And then they kind of they lose the concept of having a safe father, or a caring or gentle providing father. So there's a lot of mixed thoughts and mixed emotions when it comes to the subject of men. But I would say many, many times men are a piece of survival if they are in her life. We don't often hear her saying things like, I'm so in love with him, I want to marry him, or if she's going to marry him, it is usually motivated by her desire for her child to have a father. It is not often a love story. They were together, he was paying the bills. It's a practical mindset.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. And what I'm thinking while you're describing that is, and you and I had a pretty good conversation, that when we created this book that's over my left shoulder here, Women's Sexual Wellness. And I was describing I guess you'd say, the best case scenario, I think, relationships and the way it used to be. Again, you said 4 generations of this. So maybe back to the 70s, kind of when the sexual revolution tsunami hit the shore, basically, and everything, divorce doubled during the 1970s and all of that. But again, in our conversation, that we videoed for that book, I heard you describing what you're describing now, and these young women, and girls in some cases, maybe beyond the case, but mostly young women, from what you're describing, in their 20s, maybe being beyond being able to trust, guys again. And again, you mentioned my work earlier. My work is to try to help repair this relationship situation and damage, just through bringing the science that we know on how all of it works. That you mentioned attachment and that type of thing. So it seems, again, it appears that this damage has been brought on, by that situation where generally these girls haven't had even a role model, of a pair of, parents and that type of thing that are love each other and married and that type of thing. So it seems like a deep hole to dig out of, but I believe, that we can. But I hear what you're saying, that these young women are really, really in a deep spot and need a lot of specialized help. When you mentioned 4 years old, experiencing their first sexual event, again, the research that I've read shows that for women, for girls, for females, I should say, their first sexual arousal is huge, has a huge impact on their what we call sociosexuality, going forward, meaning their openness, to casual sex or porn or that type of thing. So I would imagine these young women that you're dealing with are a whole different situation from a lot of the young women that have had that kind of a background where they've had a two-parent home and that type of thing. Although the way it is in society with the way things are with porn and with just the general sexualization of society, no young people are going to come up these days and not be affected by it. But and also what you're describing makes me think of and hearing you say that they're willing to maybe stay in a dangerous situation in order for their child to not be fatherless. But, Stockholm syndrome comes to mind with, again, real quick for anybody that's listening that doesn't know what that is. There was a bank robbery in Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden, in 1973. And the hostages that were taken were kept for 6 days. And by the time they were done, some of the hostages became attached to their captors, even though they were threatening their lives. And they went to court for them, like testified for them, even tried to raise money for their defense. So I think, I hear what you're saying, that some of these maybe young women have some of that going on, as well as just your typical abusive, people have been in an abusive relationship with a fear and, distorted feelings and thoughts and that type of thing. So the solution, though, again, you guys are definitely the solution to it. And the solution is, I think in most cases, is to try to help them find somebody that they can, bond with and trust. And although they've come a long way, they really have to come a long way to do that. So, um, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts as far as, again, in our conversation for the book, you were saying, well, my young women say this to me, when I say, because I was advising, the whole,
Yeah, yeah.
4 months, waiting 4 months at least, for sexual activity once you're dating a guy or whatever. And of course, my absolute recommendation is, and my hope and bias is, wait until you're married, until you have sex. But 4 months minimum. And you said, that basically wasn't realistic. What do you, and I agree with you. I hear what you're saying. What do you think about it? You're kind of stuck. You're kind of stuck in a situation because guys don't seem to bond correctly if they don't have that period of time, that chase dating time where they're attracted to her but they're not having sex, especially to orgasm, which messes up the whole bonding system for the males. But what's our chances of getting these young women to be able to? Do they understand that type of thing? Would they ever trust that?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics, and often what motivates me when we're together to ask so many questions about, well, how does this impact her brain? How did her brain develop regards to sex? What's happening there in her brain? But so a couple of things regarding Stockholm syndrome. One thing that I would add of note there that I've learned is different from times of even interning and working at a domestic violence shelter in Denton, Texas, and on two universities in Denton, Texas. I've learned a couple of things. One is, there's experiences of domestic violence where the victim, usually a woman, understands that it's wrong, right? And the shame and the complexities that go along with that. And she might enter into self-blame, or doubt or justification, all these things. And then there's what I learned that you just don't learn in a book. You learn by working with the women. That's, when we work with women that are multi-generations from the same experience, they're not working from a basis of understanding that it's wrong. They're not even working from a basis of feeling like it has to be justified away or blaming, thinking it's her fault. What really provoked some research and work in the maternity housing community, which has been my portion of encouraging this trauma-informed care, was realizing that we have to first help her with a foundation to go back of what is normal and abnormal, what is right and wrong, okay, not okay. Because we learned that, we take the basis of a man hitting a woman, that was very normal. That wasn't seen as wrong. And actually, we found that we didn't see that the woman actually registered that as wrong until through some of our workbooks and work together, that she began to imagine her child as the recipient. And then we began to just kind of open that door of her imagining, wait, I want something different for my child. But for her, we weren't even working from, like, she didn't know what consent was. We had to teach what consent was, right? So that was number one. That was huge. And then number two, regarding like the ability, what can we do? What we know is, like, due to the neuroplasticity of the brain, which you would know far more about than me, is that there's absolutely an opportunity for her to change, absolutely an opportunity for her to change. What we also know, to trust. What we know, though, is that that doesn't happen in a microwave. And that's the portion where maternity housing and these wraparound services come in, is that we can see new neuro pathways form, which lead to new behaviors and new patterns and habits, new ways of parenting and communicating. But it takes time. She has to experience these new ways of living, new ways of communicating, and practice them many times over. It's quite a bit of repetition. And what we know is that she doesn't ever unlearn an old way of living. It's learning a new way of living. It's almost, in some ways, like taking her back to infancy and allowing her to learn a new way, right? And so forever now she has choices where she knows how to live the way that she originally grew up. And then she knows how to live in a way that she's been given an opportunity, to relearn, to learn a new way, right? So it's absolutely possible, but it doesn't happen quick. Which, always, this is the part where I wonder, and I think about you and your work, where my curiosities get going. I am a big fan of your work and the science there, and discussing about, what's happening with the male and the female and the chemical reactions in their body and in the brains. And often my curiosity is always back to this. So we understand that that's the case for a typical anatomy, which is great. My curiosity is there any effect, or how might it be different for someone whose brain has changed? For example, Dr. Joe, whenever a woman has grown up in these turbulent environments, we see overdeveloped amygdalas, right? We see underdeveloped frontal lobes and overdeveloped amygdalas, the amygdalas being up to 3 and 4 times the size of an average or securely attached person. And so that makes me wonder, well, when her body has been operating on that cortisol, right, her brain developed that way her whole life. It causes me to wonder, what is happening in her brain, right? Her brain, we know, has some physiological differences than an average brain, just in purely the development and size of the lobes in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then also her experiences, right? So when she had yet an experience of intimate, safe, or emotional yearning or love or sex, right? So if she's not necessarily emotionally attaching to anyone, what does that look like, right? Because I know I've heard you talk quite a bit about the emotional impact, or just kind of how women and men view and interact with sex differently, right? And how their bodies are different, and what happens in that bonding. So my curiosity is always, so what's happening with these women who were infants born into trauma, have lived a life of trauma, generational trauma, and their brains are different?
Yeah.
Or is there anything different?
Oh, no. I don't have absolute science on that, but I would absolutely bet that there's a huge differences. Like you said, the amygdala being 3 times bigger, that makes total sense, because the amygdala is the brain's survival and command and control center. So if you're always on survival mode, as you said, have a huge amount of cortisol coursing through you, and then you're in the developmental stage of your life, which would be what you're describing, particularly from during puberty, from 10 to about 15 years old. Yeah, the brain's coming like very, very different. One thing I want to mention here that research since the last time we spoke, there's a huge increase in oxytocin from 10 to 15 in both sexes. But because the female brain, the way it's constructed in the female brain and body, the impact it has, without going into the details, the impact it has on the girls is to make them very, very conscious of bonding, and having a bonding drive along with the sex drive. Oxytocin is also a sex drive raiser. Because of the guy's testosterone, it pretty much negates the bonding part of that from age 10 to 15, and it just raises the sex drive. So that would be normal development. But again, what you're describing, who knows what's happening in their brains along that line, where it's wanting to have these bonds on the female side of things and wanting to develop these long-term relationships. But as you said, they don't even know what a long-term relationship is. They're starting from ground zero. They don't know. Their normal is what you described. So yeah, it's got to be a real brain warper. Just porn use, which I'm not. The relation I'm making here is that consistent porn use, mostly usually by guys, it changes literally their brains at the genetic level. So there's all these transcription factors that do that from the images they're seeing all the time. And it takes time, as you're saying, for them to come off of that. Well, this would be even worse because it's much more traumatic, much more of probably threatening at times and sexual at times, and all this mixture of stuff but it isn't bonded with the bonding drive that they have, these girls and young women. So it's putting them away from their sexual nature. So it's got to be extremely hard on them. But we're coming down on time, unfortunately. This has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot. Hopefully everybody else has too. But just real quickly, what in your view and experience do you think is the most dangerous thing to the young women? Now, this would be all of them, including your maternity home.
Most dangerous to young women, isolation. I would say an unobservant or oblivious society or community, particularly those that are faith-based and organized within the community. So a woman who is invisible to the community around her is at risk all the time. Got it.
Makes sense. So what do you see in the future for women's health and sexual wellness? Where do you think this goes?
Well, my hope is, and my encouragement is, I'm hoping that we increase our conversations like this that are trauma informed, right? And so that we can have conversations that are inclusive for women that are at the highest risk and at most need, but often don't relate or understand the information out there. And so ensuring that, as we continue our conversations about sexual wellness, such as conversations about 4 months of delayed sexual interaction, ensuring that we are relaying that information and assisting residents or women that have experienced trauma to even, first of all, feel like that's feasible for them, that exists, that's feasible, and of course, providing support for those who need it in a trauma-informed way for sexual wellness for females that experience pornography and sex addiction as well.
Yeah, that's I agree completely. I think that's the direction we need to go in, and it's the direction you're already going in. But I hear what you're saying as far as getting the rest of society to realize how important this is, because this is really the core. This is really the core of our culture. And if we get this right, if we fix this, a lot of other things will feel the ripple, of it being fixed and going in the right direction. So it's been an honor to have you on, Valerie. We're coming down close on time. So thank you so much, my friend. And I hope your back is feeling better soon. And let's try to do this again, because I think we had a lot of other things that we
I'd love it.
Didn't get to. All right. Thanks, Valerie.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.